You should be grateful I included you. Dominic spat the words at me, his voice sharp enough to make everyone in the room flinch. Those deals add your name to our biggest projects. Most people would thank me for that kind of exposure. I stood there, holding printouts of contracts with signatures that looked like mine but weren't. My throat tightened as I realized what this meant. 14 vendor contracts. Over $3 million. 8 months of someone writing my name without my knowledge. I never signed these, I finally managed to say. Dominic laughed. Not a warm laugh, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. Look, Pia, sometimes leadership means making decisions without consulting every person in the chain. That's why I'm where I am, and you're where you are. The room felt smaller suddenly. 15 team members watched this exchange, their expressions ranging from shock to uncomfortable recognition. They knew, maybe not everything, but enough. These aren't my signatures, I repeated, finding my voice. Someone forged them. Enhanced efficiency, Dominic corrected with a dismissive wave. Now, can we get back to actual work? Or would you like to complain more about being included in our biggest wins? Before we continue further, thank you for following this journey with me. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Maybe you're commuting, making dinner, or just trying to unwind. Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to know who's hearing my story. My name is Pia Indira. I'm 32 years old, and until 8 months ago, I believed hard work and integrity always won in the end. I led project development at a growing tech consultancy firm where I'd worked for 4 years. My specialty was creating elegant solutions for complex client problems, something I took immense pride in. I was the person who stayed late without being asked, the one who fixed emergencies on weekends, the teammate who helped others meet their deadlines. My colleagues called me the problem solver. My boss, Dominic, called me reliable, which I once thought was a compliment. That morning had begun like any other. I arrived early, made tea at the little station by the window, and settled at my desk to review client requirements for an upcoming pitch. Then my phone rang. Hello, is this Pia Indira? A friendly voice asked. Yes, speaking. Great. This is Vince from Oakwood Supply. I wanted to discuss the delivery schedule changes you requested for the Horizon implementation. I paused. I'm sorry. Which implementation? Silence hung between us for a moment. The Horizon project? The vendor contract you signed 2 months ago? I think there's been a mistake, I said slowly. I'm not managing any project called Horizon. Oh, Vince sounded confused. I have the contract right here with your signature from April 14th. It's for custom interface components valued at $247,000. My stomach tightened. Could you send me a copy of that contract? Sure thing. What email should I use? What email should I use? My work email is fine, I said, reciting it for him. That's the same one we've been corresponding with, Vince said, though usually your assistant Lainey responds. I didn't have an assistant named Lainey. The contract arrived in my inbox 3 minutes later. There, at the bottom, was what appeared to be my signature, except I'd never seen this document before in my life. The signature looked like mine, but with subtle differences only I would notice. I immediately searched my email for previous correspondence about this Horizon project. Nothing. I checked our internal project management system. Nothing under my assigned projects. But when I searched the entire system for Horizon, I found it, listed under Dominic's management portfolio, with me designated as project lead, despite having zero knowledge of its existence. A cold feeling spread through me. I dug deeper and discovered 3 more projects I supposedly led, but had never heard of. By lunch, I'd uncovered 8 contract signatures that weren't mine. I approached Maya, our senior account manager and someone I trusted. I showed her one of the contracts with my forged signature. Did you know about this Frost project? I asked carefully. Maya glanced at the document, then at me. Yeah, Dominic mentioned you were heading it while juggling your other assignments. I was impressed you were managing so much. I've never seen this contract before today, I said quietly. Maya's expression shifted from confusion to concern. But your name is on all the vendor paperwork. Dominic's been highlighting these projects in leadership meetings for months, talking about your department's expanded capacity. By day's end, I discovered 14 separate vendor contracts, worth over $3 million, all bearing forgeries of my signature, all dated within the past 8 months. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen counter with copies of all 14 contracts spread before me, tracing the subtle differences in my signature across each one. Some nearly perfect, others rushed, all fake. If any project failed, those signatures would point directly to me as the responsible party. Someone else had gambled with my professional reputation without my consent. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual. Raj, our technical manager, was the only other person there. "You're here early," he commented. "Needed a quiet moment to think," I replied. Then, keeping my voice casual, "Hey, what have you heard about the Horizon implementation? The interface overhaul? It's ambitious, especially considering the client's budget constraints. Between us," he lowered his voice, "the vendor costs seem unusually high for what we're getting." "What do you mean?" "Well, comparable components on previous projects cost about 40% less. But nobody questions success, right? Dominic keeps bringing in these big contracts. The executive team is happy." I nodded thoughtfully. "Who approved the vendor selection?" "You did," Raj said, looking confused. "Your signature is on all the paperwork." The pieces started fitting together. My boss wasn't just signing my name. He was creating a safety net. If these risky projects succeeded, he'd take the credit. If they failed, evidence would point to me. When I confronted Dominic in our one-on-one meeting later that day, his reaction told me everything. "We need to discuss these signatures," I said, placing one contract on his desk. He glanced at it, then stared at me without a hint of remorse. "There's nothing to discuss. Projects are moving forward, clients are happy, and your name is getting noticed. Stop making problems where there aren't any." "This is forgery," I said firmly. "This is business," he countered. "Everyone's making money. The executive team is thrilled with our department's growth. Your bonus will reflect that success." I never approved these vendors or their rates. Dominic leaned back in his chair. "Look, Pia, you're good at the technical stuff, but I understand the bigger picture. These vendors have relationships that benefit our long-term positioning. Sometimes that costs more upfront." "What relationships?" I pressed. His expression hardened. "This conversation is over. I've got a leadership call in 5 minutes." Every day after that felt heavier than the last. I thought about reporting everything but worried about becoming a target. Dominic had been with the company for 10 years. He played golf with the CEO. I was just a team lead with a solid track record but no powerful allies. Then I realized something so simple it almost made me laugh. My signature, my actual signature, was all over legitimate company documents. The real thing existed in personnel files, on previous contracts, on countless approved timesheets. Nobody had bothered to compare the forgeries against authenticated records. For the next month, I devoted myself to learning everything about our company's approval processes. I spoke with Keisha in accounting about payment authorizations, with Wei in purchasing about vendor selection procedures, and with several trusted colleagues about past projects. I discovered something interesting. Our company had clear policies requiring multiple validations for vendor contracts, policies that had somehow been circumvented 14 separate times. The quarterly business review approached, with senior leadership and the entire team present. Dominic had prepared extensively, ready to showcase another round of successful projects under his management. I arrived that morning with a single folded paper in my pocket and determination in my heart. When everyone assembled for the quarterly review, the conference room buzzed with conversation. Executives from other departments mingled with our team members. Dominic worked the room, shaking hands and laughing too loudly at jokes. I took a seat near the back, watching. He'd mastered the performance of leadership, confident gestures, strategic name-dropping, perfect timing on when to agree and when to challenge. For years, I'd admired his polish. Now I saw it differently. The CFO called the meeting to order. "Let's begin with department updates. Dominic, I understand your team has some impressive metrics to share." Dominic stepped to the front, beaming. "Thank you, Anita. Indeed, we do." His presentation flowed smoothly through growth charts and client testimonials. He highlighted 5 major implementations from the past quarter, 3 of which bore my forged signature on their vendor contracts. "These strategic vendor partnerships have been central to our achievements," he said, displaying a slide that showed all 14 contracts as a visual backdrop. My name appeared repeatedly in the corner of each document. "We've expanded our capabilities while maintaining our core expertise. Senior Vice President Terrence nodded approvingly. The growth numbers are impressive. How have you managed to scale so quickly? Delegation and trust, Dominic answered without hesitation. I've empowered key team members like Pia to take ownership of vendor relationships. She's been instrumental in these expansions. Several people glanced my way. I kept my expression neutral. Speaking of vendors, Anita said, these new partnerships represent a significant increase in external costs. Can you speak to the return on investment? Absolutely, Dominic replied. While upfront costs are higher than historical averages, these specialized vendors bring unique capabilities that command premium rates. The client satisfaction scores validate our approach. When the question period began, I waited for the right moment. The director of operations asked about implementation timelines for upcoming projects. Before we move to future planning, I said, standing up calmly, I'd like to address these current contracts, since my signature appears on them. The room quieted. Dominic turned toward me, a flash of alarm crossing his face before his professional mask slipped back into place. I'm happy to discuss specific vendor details after the meeting, Pia, he said smoothly. Let's not derail the broader conversation. Actually, I think this is relevant to everyone, I continued, taking out my folded paper. For 8 months, I've been studying how these contracts were created, processed, and approved. I unfolded the document, a simple printout of our company's purchasing policy. According to company policy, Section 4.3, all vendor contracts require 2 signatures, the department head and the project lead. But what's fascinating is that finance must verify both signatures against personnel records before any payments are processed. I turned to Anita, which means for 8 months, someone in finance has been approving payments despite having my real signature on file. And seeing these obvious forgeries, I've been wondering who authorized bypassing our verification process and why. Anita straightened in her chair, her expression shifting from confusion to sharp interest. I'm not questioning the projects themselves, I added. I'm asking about the breakdown in our financial controls that allowed this to continue unchecked across 14 separate contracts. Dominic's face changed color as the focus shifted from him to larger questions about financial oversight. What exactly are you suggesting, Pia? Terrence asked, his attention fully engaged. I'm stating facts, I replied calmly. These 14 contracts bear signatures that aren't mine. I never reviewed these vendors, never approved their rates, and in several cases, never even knew these projects existed until a vendor called me directly last month. Dominic stepped forward. This is clearly a misunderstanding. Pia and I discussed these projects extensively. Perhaps in the rush of implementation, some communication got lost. That would explain one project, I said, not 14 over 8 months. And it doesn't explain why my signature was used without my knowledge. The room went quiet. I could feel the weight of everyone's attention. Anita turned to Dominic. Is this accurate? Were these signatures added without Pia's direct approval? Dominic adjusted his tie. We have an expedited approval process for time-sensitive opportunities. Pia was always informed of the projects. I wasn't, I interrupted. And the signature process was simply to maintain workflow efficiency, he continued, ignoring me. The executive team approved this streamlined approach last year. Anita frowned. I don't recall any policy changes to our signature verification requirements. It was discussed during the strategic planning retreat, Dominic insisted. Ask Terrence. All eyes turned to the senior VP, who looked perplexed. We discussed accelerated approval workflows, but not bypassing signature verification. That would create significant compliance issues. I spoke again, keeping my voice even. 3 weeks ago, I pulled the activity logs from our project management system. For 8 of these 14 projects, my user account was never granted access until after the contracts were signed. I literally couldn't have known about them. Murmurs spread through the room. I continued. Furthermore, I've compared the market rates for similar vendor services. These contracts average 42% above standard pricing for comparable deliverables. Different vendors have different quality standards, Dominic said dismissively. We chose premium partners for premium clients. Then why keep the project lead in the dark? I asked. Why forge signatures instead of getting proper approvals? Terrence raised his hand to pause the back and forth. This is serious. Anita, I think we need to pause this meeting and convene the compliance team immediately. Agreed, the CFO said, starting to gather her materials. Dominic, Pia, please stay. Everyone else will reschedule the remainder of today's agenda. As people filed out, the tension in the room thickened. Dominic stared at me with barely concealed fury. I met his gaze without flinching. When only the three of us and Terrence remained, Anita spoke first. Dominic, I need you to explain exactly what happened with these signatures. This is a witch hunt, he replied. Pia is ambitious. She's seen how successful these projects have been and now wants to distance herself from the decisions while claiming I acted inappropriately. That doesn't address the signatures, Terrence noted. In fast-moving business environments, sometimes paperwork follows after decisions are made, Dominic argued. Pia and I had verbal agreements. The signatures were administrative formalities. Formalities that carry legal weight, Anita pointed out, and potentially expose our company to serious liability. I stayed quiet, letting them talk. I'd said what I needed to say. Now the focus was exactly where it belonged, on the breakdown of financial controls. What do these vendors actually provide? Terrence asked suddenly. Specialized technical components, Dominic answered quickly. Advanced interface modules, proprietary algorithms, custom analytics frameworks. And how were these vendors selected? Anita pressed. Dominic hesitated. Standard evaluation process. They offer unique capabilities. Who ran the evaluation? I asked. His eyes flashed with irritation. My team evaluated several options. Which team members specifically? Anita asked. Look, this is getting ridiculous, Dominic snapped. I've brought in millions in new business. Our department's growth outpaces every other division. Instead of interrogating me, you should be asking how we can replicate this success. By forging signatures? I asked quietly. Terrence held up his hand again. We need to take this methodically. Anita, please engage internal audit to review all 14 contracts, their approval processes, and payment histories. She nodded. We'll need to notify legal as well. This is unnecessary, Dominic protested. It's standard procedure for any financial control question, Terrence replied firmly. Nothing personal, just governance. As they discussed next steps, I watched Dominic's confident facade begin to crack. His leg bounced nervously under the table. He checked his phone repeatedly. Tiny beads of sweat formed at his hairline. I thought about the 4 years I'd spent working for him, the weekends I'd sacrificed, the ideas he'd presented as his own, the promotions that went to others while I remained too valuable in my current role. After the meeting, Dominic cornered me in the hallway. You've made a serious mistake, he hissed. I was helping your career. Now you've torpedoed both our futures. I didn't forge anyone's signature, I replied simply. You think the executive team cares about technicalities? They care about results. I delivered those. You just created a problem nobody wanted to deal with. Financial fraud is more than a technicality, I said. He leaned closer. Do you really think you can win this? I've been here 10 years. I've built relationships you can't imagine. When this blows over, you'll be the troublemaker no one wants to work with. I looked him directly in the eyes. Why were you paying these vendors 42% above market rate? Something flickered across his face. Surprise, then worry. You should be careful with accusations, he said, his voice lower now. It's not an accusation. It's a question about vendor selection criteria. I kept my tone professional. One, the audit team will certainly ask. He stepped back. This conversation is over. As he walked away, I noticed his normally confident stride was slightly off balance. The next 3 weeks were tense but revealing. Internal audit requested interviews with everyone involved in the 14 projects. They collected documentation, email histories, and meeting notes. The investigation expanded beyond just the signatures to examine the entire vendor selection and management process. I cooperated fully, providing everything they asked for, including copies of the system access logs and my detailed analysis of vendor pricing discrepancies. I also shared something else I'd discovered. 6 of the 14 vendors were less than a year old, with minimal online presence and no verifiable client references beyond our company. Meanwhile, Dominic worked frantically to maintain control. He sent frequent team emails highlighting department successes. He organized unnecessary status meetings where he emphasized everyone's interdependence. But most revealing was how he began constructing a narrative about misunderstandings and delegation gone wrong. In our growth phase, some processes became informal, he explained during one team meeting. I take responsibility for not maintaining stricter documentation. Moving forward, we'll implement additional oversight. People weren't buying it. The atmosphere changed as more details emerged. Team members who had once competed for Dominic's approval now avoided being associated with him. When he entered rooms, conversations paused. 4 weeks into the investigation, I received an email from Terrence, requesting a private meeting the following morning. I arrived at his office, unsure what to expect. "Pia," he greeted me. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." His expression gave nothing away. My heart pounded as I sat down, wondering if Dominic had somehow turned the situation around. "The audit team has completed their preliminary findings," Terrence began. "I wanted to speak with you before the official report is circulated." I nodded, trying to appear calmer than I felt. "They've confirmed that all 14 signatures were indeed forgeries," he continued, "but that's just the beginning. They've uncovered a pattern that raises significant concerns about these vendor relationships." He slid a folder across his desk. "These 6 vendors, they all trace back to the same registered agent. And when we examined the banking information," Terrence paused, studying my reaction. "The payment approvals were manipulated to bypass standard verification. Someone with administrative access altered the workflow to skip secondary review." I let this sink in. "What happens next?" "The board meets tomorrow to review the complete findings. They'll determine appropriate actions." He leaned forward. "What I need to know from you is this. How long have you suspected there was more to this than just your forged signature?" I considered my answer carefully. I've had questions for years about how certain decisions were made, but nothing concrete. When I discovered the forged signatures last month, I initially thought it was just Dominic taking shortcuts to get things done. I opened the folder Terrence had given me, but when I looked into the vendor pricing, the disparities were too significant to ignore. Something felt deliberately wrong, not just administratively sloppy. "Why didn't you come directly to leadership with your concerns?" I met his eyes. "Because I needed evidence, not just suspicions." In previous situations, when I raised concerns about Dominic's management, I was told I was being too rigid or not seeing the bigger picture. Terrence nodded slowly. "That's fair, and consistent with what we've heard from others." "What others?" I asked, surprised. Once the investigation started, several team members came forward with similar experiences. Decisions made in their name, credit redirected, warnings dismissed. He sighed. "We're seeing a pattern that goes well beyond these 14 contracts." I hadn't expected that. I'd been so focused on my own situation that I hadn't considered others might have similar stories. "There's something else you should know," Terrence continued. "The audit team traced where the payments to those 6 suspicious vendors ultimately went." My breath caught, and, through a series of transfers, significant portions ended up in an offshore account linked to a small investment company. The beneficial owner of that company appears to be Dominic's brother-in-law. The realization hit me like a physical force. This wasn't just about taking shortcuts or claiming credit. It was actual fraud. "We don't have complete confirmation yet," Terrence cautioned, "but the evidence is compelling. Criminal charges are possible." "I never imagined it would go this far," I admitted. "I just wanted the signature forgery to stop." "You did exactly what you should have," Terrence assured me. "You identified a serious control failure and brought it to appropriate attention. The rest," he gestured to the folder, "the rest is on those who made these choices." As I left his office, my mind raced. This had started with my signature being used without permission. Now it had uncovered what appeared to be a sophisticated fraud scheme. The following day passed in a blur of interviews and documentation requests. The next morning, an all-staff email announced a mandatory department meeting at 2 p.m. When I arrived, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Dominic was nowhere to be seen. Anita and Terrence sat at the front of the room alongside Elena from legal and a woman I recognized from human resources. Terrence began once everyone was seated. "Thank you for coming on short notice. We have some significant departmental changes to announce." Anita took over. Effective immediately, Dominic Carter is no longer with the company. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Though many had suspected something was coming, hearing it stated so directly was still shocking. We understand this creates uncertainty, Terrence continued. Leadership changes are challenging under any circumstances, and the nature of this particular transition makes it especially difficult. Elena from Legal spoke next. While we cannot discuss all details for confidentiality and ongoing investigation reasons, we want to be as transparent as possible. A routine review identified serious policy violations and potential financial improprieties. We're working with appropriate authorities to address these issues. What happens to current projects? Someone asked. All active work continues, Anita assured everyone. We're implementing temporary leadership structures while we assess permanent solutions. After covering immediate concerns, Terrence added, this situation has also highlighted the need to strengthen our internal controls and create safer channels for raising concerns. The meeting concluded with assurances of support and requests for patience during the transition. As people filed out, Maya caught up with me. You knew, didn't you? She asked quietly. I knew something wasn't right, I answered. I had no idea how far it went. Everyone's saying you're the one who caught him, she continued. That you tracked the money somehow. I shook my head. I just asked questions about signature verification. The audit team did the real detective work. Still, Maya said, you stood up when no one else did. That took courage. 2 days later, I received another meeting request, this time with Anita, Terrence, and the CEO, Jerome. My stomach knotted as I walked to the executive floor. Despite reassurances, part of me still feared becoming collateral damage in this mess. Jerome greeted me warmly. Pia, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. The conversation that followed wasn't what I expected. We've been evaluating our organizational structure in light of recent events, Jerome began, and we've identified significant gaps in our compliance and oversight systems. Anita continued. The board has approved creation of a new contract compliance division to address these vulnerabilities. It will have direct reporting lines to the audit committee to ensure independence. We'd like you to head this division, Terrence said. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. You want me to lead a new division? Jerome nodded. Your background in project management gives you valuable operational knowledge. When combined with your evident commitment to proper controls, you're uniquely qualified for this role. This would be a director-level position, Anita added. With appropriate compensation adjustments and a team of 3 to start, I struggled to process what they were offering. What exactly would this division do? Develop and implement stronger verification processes for all vendor relationships, Jerome explained. Create training on contract compliance, perform spot audits to ensure adherence, and most importantly, establish an early warning system for inconsistencies. You found a serious flaw in our system, Terrence said. We want you to help make sure it never happens again. 6 weeks after discovering my forged signature on million-dollar contracts, I sat in my new office reviewing staffing plans for the contract compliance division. The frosted glass door still had that new sticker smell, and I was still adjusting to being addressed as Director Indira. My team, 2 analysts and a compliance specialist, were scheduled to start the following Monday. Our first project, implementing an enhanced signature verification system with biometric authentication. A knock at my door interrupted my planning. I looked up to see Wei from purchasing. Got a minute? He asked. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Wei sat down, looking slightly uncomfortable. I wanted to talk to you about something strange with a new vendor application that came across my desk yesterday. What about it? The pricing seemed excessive for standard components. When I questioned it, the department head got defensive, said I was slowing down an urgent client need. Wei hesitated. It reminded me of how Dominic used to respond. I felt a chill. Which department? Client services. The paperwork was pushed by their new senior director, the one who just transferred from the East Coast office. Wei nodded. And here's where it gets interesting. I did some checking on the vendor. They were established 3 months ago. Minimal history. But their bank routing information matched another vendor in our system, one of the 6 connected to Dominic's scheme. I straightened in my chair. Send me everything you have. I'll take it from here. There's something else, Wei added. I heard from a friend in the East Coast office. Apparently, their previous senior director left under mysterious circumstances, financial irregularities that were quietly handled. And they sent us that director's replacement without disclosure. I finished. The implications clear. Exactly. After Wei left, I pulled up the company directory. The new senior director had an impressive resume and recommendations from multiple executives. But now I wondered, how thoroughly had anyone checked? How many other Dominics might be operating throughout the company, protected by impressive results and powerful connections? I opened a new document and began typing, proposed framework for executive hiring controls and background verification. The systemic vulnerabilities extended far beyond my former boss. My new role gave me the authority to address the underlying conditions that allowed such behaviors to thrive. Later that week, I encountered Dominic's former assistant, Lainey, in the cafeteria. She'd been reassigned to marketing after the investigation. "How are you adjusting?" I asked as we waited in the lunch line. "Better than expected," she admitted. "It's nice working for someone who doesn't make me forge signatures or lie about their whereabouts." "You knew what was happening?" She nodded. "Some of it. He kept most details compartmentalized. No single person saw the whole picture. Did you ever consider reporting it?" "Once," Lainey said, her voice dropping. I hinted to HR that I was uncomfortable with certain requests. 2 days later, Dominic called me into his office and mentioned how his recommendation could either help or hurt my future prospects. The message was clear. I thought about how many others might have similar stories. Small moments of courage, met with subtle threats. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. "I'm sorry I wasn't braver," she replied. "When I heard what you did in that meeting, I wish I'd had that courage." 3 months after the investigation, the full impact of Dominic's actions became public when criminal charges were filed. The news reported that approximately $875,000 had been diverted through the fraudulent vendor scheme. Dominic faced multiple felony counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and falsification of business records. The company implemented all 12 recommendations from my new division, creating what the board called the most robust contract controls in the industry. I now reported directly to the audit committee with a team that had grown to 7. Dominic's replacement, Charlotte, proved to be everything he wasn't: transparent, collaborative, and genuine in giving credit. The department flourished under her leadership, achieving growth targets without the ethical compromises of the past. As for Dominic, his legal troubles extended beyond our company. Investigations revealed similar schemes at 2 previous employers who had quietly let him resign rather than face public embarrassment. His carefully constructed reputation crumbled as the full pattern emerged. 1 year after that fateful quarterly meeting, I received an unexpected email, a court notice that Dominic had accepted a plea deal. The terms included restitution, a 5-year prohibition from financial positions, and 18 months in a minimum security facility. Attached to the formal notice was a personal message from the prosecutor. "Your documentation and testimony were instrumental in securing this outcome. Most corporate fraud goes unreported or unpunished. Your courage made the difference." I didn't feel triumphant reading those words. Instead, I felt a complex mix of vindication and sadness. For the damage done, for the trust broken, for a talented person who chose deception over integrity. The most effective revenge wasn't getting Dominic fired or seeing him face legal consequences. It was transforming the system that had enabled his behavior in the first place. By creating new safeguards and empowering people to speak up without fear, I'd helped ensure no one else would experience what I and others had endured. The following week, I presented our latest compliance enhancements to the board. As I concluded, the chair asked an unexpected question. "Director Indira, beyond the technical improvements, what do you consider the most important change we've made?" I thought about Lainey, about Wei, about all the employees who had started using our anonymous reporting system. "Creating an environment where integrity is valued over results," I answered. "Where people believe they'll be protected when they do the right thing." He nodded approvingly. "That's not measurable on any dashboard, but it may be the most valuable asset we have." As I gathered my materials, I realized something profound had shifted. Not just in the company, but in myself. I no longer defined success by titles or recognition, but by the impact of my work on others. The signature that once was forged had ultimately signed my path to something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If my story resonated with you in any way, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real experiences like mine. I'd love to hear your thoughts or similar experiences in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the most powerful act isn't getting even. It's changing the system that allowed the wrong to happen in the first place.